Hello, everybody. It's Michael Hollands for Sound of the Movies. Today, I have the pleasure to be joined by film producer Jeff Most. On today's episode, we will focus on the 30th anniversary of the classic film The Crow. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Jeff Most.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you on my program, and thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule. That really means a lot to me. And The Crow is one of my favorite films ever. I mean, it's such not also a '90s classic, but a classic in general. I mean, one of the best comic book adaptations of all time, released at a time when comic book movies were not a dime a dozen. Back in the day, as I just pointed out, it wasn't commonplace for those films to be released, and it was a landmark project. And what was important, Jeff, when it came to picking the right director, also also considering that it was Alex Proyas' second film.
Well, of course, the the film's director was as critical a decision as anything. We had done at that point in the development. Um, I was introduced to Alex through a friend of mine through a music video reel. He'd been signed to a company called Limelight in Hollywood, run by Simon Fields and Steve Barron, who were my partners on the first feature I'd set up, which was The Specialist at Warner Brothers, which was actually produced after The Crow. And I had a director attached at that point, but frankly, I was so impressed by Alex Proyas's. First, I saw the music video reel, and then I got a hold of his commercial reel. He was represented by Propaganda, where he was working with the DOP, Derek Wolski, who had just done his first film, Romeo is Bleeding. And he was amongst the top directors there, which included David Fincher, who were probably at the time the most groundbreaking set of directors operating in the commercial and music video world and going back and forth between the two. I actually hired Alex Proyas over a phone call to Australia. After speaking with him, I'd been very much left in charge of the creative development by Ed Pressman, who really liked and seconded my opinion about Alex Proyas. I had not seen his first feature. I was unaware there was any first feature made. It was a film he made straight out of school. It had not been released, and he didn't end up showing it to me until many months later. I didn't even know it existed, frankly, but it certainly demonstrated his incredible talent. But I think he, because it was not particularly commercial and it was straight out of school, almost like a school project for him, I believe. I don't recall the particular details. He was not sharing it at the time, but Alex Proyas was immediately taken by the very cinematographic feel of the comic books. And so, and you could see in his work at the time, both at a music video level and particularly on many of the commercials he'd done, this incredible work, particularly the commercials he had done with Darius Wolski, how much the comic book actually reflected elements in their work at the time. And I certainly wouldn't say there was any direct correlative, any direct line to any particular piece they had done, but the work they had done with light and shadow really impressed me from a very visual standpoint. And I, in my first call, learned a number of things about Alex, and one of which I found fascinating, as we talked about both of our passion for these, the comics, which were in a very early stage, by the way. We'd only, my partner, John Shirley, my writing partner, who was credited on the Crow, and I actually wrote the original treatments and the screenplay while James O Barr was writing the comics. So we only had 2 issues actually produced of what would be the 6-issue arc, or what would become the graphic novel when it was combined and compiled into that graphic novel, when those issues were combined. But Alex Proyas had originally been a cinematographer. And so he really approached everything in a very cinematic way. And our discussions related to this black and white comic and how it really reflected an environment, one we both were familiar with. We both had kind of a punk background. Alex had been in a punk band, actually, and I had, proudly become a punk at 17 and went to punk shows, as a teenager, growing up in Manhattan. And so we connected over this music world that was depicted in the comics, because, James O Barr was also, of a similar age, and had a similar, appreciation. He had, drawn the characters with every kind of, every kind of similar touchstone rock star, from Peter Murphy of Bauhaus, Iggy Pop, Robert Smith of The Cure, with even, quotes laid in from The Cure used by permission, which became very funny later on when I banged head on to that. But it really was just a very, important choice. Obviously, is not even, putting the significance on the word, to find really the right director. It was difficult for me to have to fire another director I'd already started developing the work with, but I just felt so passionate about what I'd seen in Alex's work, and just on one conversation, just really wanted to just proceed as quickly as I could with the development. We gave him the screenplay that at that point my partner and I had written. Yeah, it was a kind of love at first sight from, I think, both sides of the table, with this material really being the lightning rod that I think just, it spoke volumes to what Alex wanted to do in terms of the chances he wanted to take, the risks, and pushing the envelope. And these were the sorts of things that really impressed me. When I had optioned the comics from James O Barr, which I did for $1 actually, with the pledge that we would do something, that both from a financial standpoint and a creative standpoint, we felt would be tremendously beneficial to him. But on the creative side, he had told me he had gotten an offer from New Line Cinema to buy the comics from him, and they told him, the executive there told him that it would have to be a PG-13 film. And he asked me, would you make this a PG-13 film? And I said, well, no, this is certainly not, as you've drawn this comic, anything like a PG-13 film. And I pledged to him I would make the first R-rated, or adult-oriented, I should say, but R-rated in American terms, comic book adaptation, live-action comic book adaptation. The only one I was familiar with was an animated film that Fritz the Cat, which had, I'm not even sure. I believe it. I'm not sure if the comic was ahead of the movie or not, but in terms of a live-action comic book adaptation, none had been made, to my knowledge, at that time. That was a strictly R-rated film. We'd end up actually getting an NC-17 rating at first based on the film, even actually due to a scene that I'd written that we'd shot that had to be taken out because the ratings board, amongst other things, felt that we had crossed the line. But we were a very hard R-rated movie, which we were very proud of, and it was one of the reasons that James O Barr entrusted me with the material. And Alex Proyas and I both shared that same vision about how we wish to develop it as a property and proceed with, trying to make as accurate a depiction of the comic book as we possibly could.
Thank you very much. And which scene did they feel crossed the line, if I may ask?
Well, I had written a scene in the third draft of the script when Angel David and his character goes in. Actually, he goes in with top dollar to Skank goes in with top dollar to get some road beers and cigarettes into a deli. They actually get held up by, well, young kid, preteens, like 12, 13-year-olds who are wearing dark shades, trying to emulate kind of a Terminator look, and are held up there in the deli, and basically get out of there, while then the kids proceed to come around the aisle where they were picking up the beer, and it turned their guns and held them up, and then I gave them a few bucks to go away, and then as they're leaving, they actually go to hold up the store owner. So that was just too much for the ratings board. But there were several other scenes. Frankly, we had to tone down the violence in their minds. Things were too graphic for them. But the trims we made ultimately were nothing that actually interfered with the viewing experience. So, but one tries as one may to really, flesh out the material in the best way possible. And for us, that was, pushing the envelope as far as we could in every respect.
There's actually going to be a new 4K release. Have there ever been any discussions about restoring the material which had to be cut for the R rating back then, or has the material actually been lost?
I don't know if the material's been lost. There's never been any discussion of returning or re-editing the film. I think we all are, as filmmakers, satisfied with the film that we made, and I don't think that Alex Proyas, to my knowledge, ever felt that any of the trims that were made, which were not that many, frankly, they were. I don't want to suggest that they were, worth opening the film to re-edit. I'm not aware that he has ever felt the need to make a director's cut, if you will. I think that the film is definitive, and certainly it was hard enough finishing the film after all that occurred. I don't think that there is any need to revisit it in that sense. But I more was pointing to the process and trying to be illustrative of the conviction that we shared in, and so did the screenwriter, David Scow, who did an amazing job moving on from what was the John Shirley and my third draft into taking over virtually all of the production writing. David Scow did an immense amount of work and kept to that same spirit and even pushed the envelope further. And working with Alex Proyas and what he wanted to do in terms of really pushing that envelope. I don't think there's any more need to revisit it. It was all so eloquently done, really.
Yeah. I think the film is really fantastic the way it is, but I should point this out because also the Blu-rays, or which was released many years ago, also featured an extended scene which concerns the massacre, the meeting that Top Dollar Michael Wincott's character hosts when also Skank gets killed. Several edits had to be made there, or the arcade scene was trimmed down a bit with David Patrick Kelly. It's always interesting to learn about that and why it was trimmed, or let's say an MPAA related issue perhaps. So that's always an interesting subject matter to say the least. But actually, I heard, and I don't know if this is true, that the film was initially supposed to be a musical.
No, by no means. No, James O Barr said that I think he was reflecting on, at the time. Yeah, no, I mean, there was a moment in which my partner, my producing partner, Ed Pressman, who has passed away recently. I don't think Ed really understood the audience for the film in a certain sense from a musical standpoint. Although he enjoyed all the music I put together when I compiled the soundtrack, for a moment, before we had gotten there, because he knew that we had placed a great importance on the music in the film, and one of my contributions in terms of making a change from the comic was to make Eric a guitarist. He had a thought one day that, oh, well, yeah, maybe Michael Jackson should play the role, which we immediately quashed. but James O Barr, I think, had been either present on that conference call or possibly in our offices in Ed's office in Beverly Hills for that conversation. But no, this was before we had gotten to the point of casting, and when John Shirley and I were adapting the comic, and we would call James O Barr on a routine basis weekly, ask all kinds of questions about where he was headed with this and that, because again, we had two comics out of a 6 episode arc. I said to my writing partner, John Shirley, the very renowned cyberpunk novelist, that I wanted to make Eric a guitarist in a band, because I wanted to put a soundtrack together that was very important to me. My background at that point, I had produced 5 years of straight out of NYU film school. I had while I was still in film school, I created a music video show pilot that got sold to REI Italian Television and VIR Broadcasting, the people who did King Biscuit Flower Hour at the time in America. It was a format. It didn't end up getting produced, but I wrote, produced, and directed a pilot that did get sold. And so when I came to Hollywood, I had that under my belt. And as a 22-year-old, I got hired at Columbia Pictures Television as a production coordinator on a music video TV series called Top 40 Videos. And I'd been a college DJ, and I was really into much darker music, frankly, than Top 40 music. But it was a job. And long story short, I made producer on the show because when executive producers asked me what I thought of the music, and I said, if I have to watch the same Prince or Madonna video again, I'm just going to blow my brains out, because I would sit in post-production, and we did 5 half hours a week in an hour. Anyway, they gave me an opportunity to program the show on a bet, and I improved the rating significantly, and so I was made producer of that show and in charge of the music when I was 23. And one of the things I brought to the show was the ability for rock stars to host individual hours that were on the weekend, play music that they wanted. So when we did The Crow, I had this, deep association, I would say, with many of the music managers in Hollywood, as well as many bands. I always brought bands that, were more left of center, and, would have John Doe and X Scene of X host a show, even though it was top 40 videos, or, bands that were more cutting edge at that moment than, say, what was top 40 traditional material. In any event, I wanted to make, Eric a guitarist, and I had the conversation with my writing partner, and he said, well, look, I'm a novelist, it's really important to me that we remain faithful to the comic. And I said, no, of course. I said, but he really doesn't have a job. He said, well, if James is okay with, James O Barr is okay with you make him a guitarist, then, it's fine with me. So I called James and I said, James, I'd like to make Eric a guitarist. And he said, well, like in a band, is he going to sing? And I said, no. I just want him as a guitarist in a little alternative band. I really want the music, to be part of him as his ethos and as a character, because I want him to be really an aesthete, an artist. I see him as that in the comic. You used all these references to rock stars. You've even driven his body like, is something of Iggy Pop's, and his facial look is, a little Peter Murphy, and and so forth. And he said, well, it would be kind of weird if he sings, right? I'm like, no, not going to be musical in that sense. I just really want him to be able to use the guitar as an expression of what he's going through. If I can take that and in this kind of rock and roll hero, develop, what I hope to be an original soundtrack in which there's not a single song that's been released and it's organic to the world, well, that would be, my goal. And I think a step in that direction would be to make Eric a guitarist. And James said, okay, sounds cool to me. And so Eric, his name was only Eric in the comics. When Ulrich goes to a file cabinet, it says C-D. So I came up with the name Draven because I thought Eric D. the Raven for a little fun. I guess that name has actually stuck very well, which I'm proud of. But yeah, he was just Eric. So we were just talking about him as Eric at that moment. And I just felt he needed a last name. So I on another call, asked him if it was okay if I gave him a last name, Draven. And James O Barr said, yeah, that's fine. Please go ahead. I didn't give him when I asked him what his job was, because he didn't, at that point, it either hadn't appeared in episodes of the comic, issues 1 or 2. He said, well, I just imagine, he was kind of a, house painter. I mean, he earned his, living as a house painter. And I said, no, that's wonderful. But maybe as a house painter whose, side gig is, being an alternative guitarist and maybe a local band that put out one album, on a small regional label. And, but, certainly has the ability to, maybe take off at some point. But I love the idea of this, because he, of course, as a character in the comics and in the movie, was going to have to, be quite violent. And in a sense, I really wanted to balance that. In the comics, Eric is doing almost like pirouettes, and look, the one thing that we dropped was that, in James's mind, he was a heroin addict as well. He was very thin, and while he was alive, he'd been an addict. And, certainly that tied into the, rock star pathos and ethos. But we didn't obviously make use of that. But, I certainly wanted a healthy Eric Draven. But the point is, in the comics, and by the way, he doesn't make a big deal of that. There's like a needle hanging around in like a frame or two in the comics. which he and I discussed, which James and so did John Shirley. We didn't feel it was pertinent to the character in any way. Particularly, certainly, if that was his living life, he certainly wasn't going to be an addict when he returned. But we didn't. That was not. It certainly interfered with us in our minds with the love story, and even maybe it was. He was an occasional user, I think, was the discussion we had. It wasn't that he was an addict. I apologize to say. I think he was. They call it a chipper or something like that, who just did it once in a while. In any event, we see him in this very aesthetic design of somebody who is an artiste of sorts. And so, yeah, the whole musical thing came out of, me wanting to just make him a guitarist. And I think in James's mind, there were conjurings there of something more. But in that discussion, in discussions with Ed Pressman and explaining what we were going for with the music, I think he saw an association. Well, let's bring in the biggest, music act in the world, Michael Jackson. And I assured Ed up and down that was completely out of the sphere of what this world is. And, I think, if I remember correctly, Thriller had already existed. And I think in Ed's mind, there was a connection to Michael Jackson from the Thriller video, having been somebody back from the dead. And, I got the connection, but it was not at all what we were looking to do. So we immediately shot it down. But I find it kind of amusing now that, James brings up these things, because in context, I think that was an idea that had a shelf life of about 30 minutes.
The music plays a big role in this film. You have a great score by Graeme Revell, who also used to be a part of an industrial band many years ago. It's a great hybrid score. I mean, it does feature interesting percussion elements, a big string section, synthesizers. So it's a very hybrid, also quote unquote organic sound. And you have the songs by The Cure, Nine Inch Nails, Jesus and Mary Chain, and so on. And how would you describe the musical identity of this film and how everything came together with the songs and also Graeme Revell?
Well, that's quite a big picture. Certainly, we had looked at a couple of different composers. Let's just start with Graeme, since you started there. And, I was familiar with SBK. I was an industrial music fan. And at one point we'd even, imagine that this industrial world would have kind of, as dissonant a soundtrack as Einstein and Neubauten, which was one of the, kind of musical references we were playing with to be evocative of, the industrial nature of this part of Detroit. If I remember the name of it, it was Del Rey, this kind of ghetto-ish area that was kind of the inspiration for the area that James O Barr was familiar with, where he grew up in Detroit. That was, the idea being almost like there was some kind of in the background somewhere, some kind of plant stamping something, but we grew from that, wanting to, have something that was more lyrical, of course. And in meeting Graeme Revell, knowing his prior incarnation as this, composer in SBK, and him immediately getting the whole gestalt of the musical approach we wanted to take, which was to be everything from, something on the harder side to, the more obviously melodic and tender as may be needed. Those conversations certainly cemented his involvement early on, and he was on board, prior to our even, going to location to start pre-production. And at that point, I had already begun work on the soundtrack. And what we found was certainly that the same kinds of elements that we anticipated utilizing in Graham's score could be found really most, provocatively through the songs themselves, because there was no need to actually have Graham replicate any what we were doing, but more or less be really seamless in coming in and out of the songs, and having that background that he did. It really fit with that kind of oral motif, if you will, of making sure that there was balance between the composed music and the music, a lot of which was written directly for the film by all these bands. And I mean, it is a funny story. I mean, I had this dream of working with all these bands. Many other bands, in fact, submitted demos that just didn't, for one reason or another, work. And others even recorded songs that I would have gladly had, such as one that Smashing Pumpkins wrote for us called Silverfuck, which was a 10-minute song. It mentions the Crow, quite prominently, and it's a song that they needed for their album. Unfortunately, even they wrote it for us. Their manager, Andy Gershon, said, "I'm sorry, they don't have enough songs to make they only had their EP, I believe, when I first approached them, and it was going to be their first album. It may have been Siamese Dream. I forget the name, but that may be the album. In any event, we started compiling the music early on in terms of ideas of what we wanted to do. And I was turned down by every record label. They all thought I was on crack, basically. They said, where's your top 40 hit? I'm like, there won't be any. Well, you have to have them. Nobody's putting out a soundtrack without top 40 hits. I mean, you can go ahead and mix some things in, buddy, but you've got to have hits. You've got to have big names. And I said, no, it's going to be an all alternative soundtrack, and everything's going to be written for the movie. And they went, oh yeah, very much, very funny. There's the door. And so I got an introduction. I was a huge Nine Inch Nails fan, and we had 2 slots in the movie for on-camera appearances. And I was still, hoping I could convince somebody out there to let me have put together a soundtrack album. But I thought a good step would be to see if I could involve Nine Inch Nails on camera. And so I got an introduction to John Malm, Trent Reznor's manager and manager of Nine Inch Nails, and I spent an amazing day with Trent. He was at that point renting a house in Benedict Canyon, which was startlingly the house that Roman Polanski lived in with Sharon Tate, when Sharon Tate was murdered. And he showed me around the house where everything occurred. And he basically had set up shop in his living room, he had a dog, and he did everything in there. And we talked all afternoon about the kind of music that I wanted to have in the movie. And by the way, before the meeting, Trent had read the script, read the comics, and was happy to talk about it. I'd actually asked if he would consider covering a Joy Division song, because the comics were dedicated to Ian Curtis of Joy Division, and I thought it would be an honor. And I approached it with a too obvious choice. I said, Trent, given the story, would you consider covering Love Will Tear Us Apart? And he said, well, look, let me think about that, but could it be any Joy Division song? I said, Trent, you do whatever song you like, whichever you would want, whatever moves you. And so we began a rapport, and he called me and said, well, I'm working on Dead Souls. And I said, well, that's brilliant. I think that's just genius. I'm sorry I didn't think of it myself, but thank you for doing that. I got the demo from him. I thought it was amazing, and I couldn't have been more excited to have him appear on camera. But rewinding, because that didn't happen, I'll get there. But that meeting that day, in going over the lists of bands that I wanted to approach, and there were even more, I forget who he picked on, and he went, oh yeah, he looked at the list. It was quite long, and he goes, you've even got Sonic Youth here. No one's going to let you do this. All these other bands, I mean, come on, let's be real. And I said, Trent, if you agree to do the soundtrack, I really believe that I should, I'll have a chance at getting it made, and I will be able to. He said, look, I love the bands you've laid out here. This would be brilliant if you could do it. He said, look, I don't know if my involvement will get you there, but by the end of the meeting, he said, look, I'm in. I want to do this. Call my manager, let him know I'm in, and then put a call into my A&R executive, Tom Wally at Interscope, and let him know that you have my commitment. And so I called John first, and he said, that's great. Call Tom Wally. He said the same thing. I called Tom, and he said, well, if Trent's in, we're in, and I'll let the guys know at Atlantic Records because they distribute us. We'll do it. Let's do the soundtrack. And so with that, I was the lead producer of the movie, and I was also now a kid in a candy store because I was like, I'm gonna hopefully put this album together that really will speak to the experience of everything that is going on thematically on camera through the music. And my dream, my goal was to create an album that when you listen to it, the whole album took you back to those emotional moments in the movie. And yet my whole pitch to everyone was I didn't want a single song to have been released because I didn't want anybody in the theater to be taken out and go, oh yeah, I remember that. I'm hearing that song. Yeah, I was making out with my girlfriend when I heard that last. Or, I wanted their attention completely undivided in the story and in this world where everything was organic to it. But at the same time, I did want that soundtrack to have that exact, experience for the listener after they watched the movie. I approached Robert Smith's manager, and Robert, I was told right off the bat, doesn't license his music to movies, has never written a song for a film, and actually he has licensed 2 songs. And the 2 songs went to Melrose Place. And that's the entirety of the licensing he's ever done. And I said, okay. I said, but Robert Smith is a fan of the comics. So, and I was asking his manager, to just, she said, what do you mean he's a fan of the comics? He said, well, I said, if you look throughout the comics, I'll send them over to you with script. There's Cure lyrics. And he used by permission. So, and she goes, that's curious, but okay, I'll send the whole package off. She calls me back and she said, well, first off, let me tell you that Robert had never heard of The Crow, never gave permission for his lyrics to be used. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, at this point, I'm like, oh God, I've opened the doors to a lawsuit. What have I done? And she says, in spite of that, he loves everything, and he's agreed to write his first ever song for a movie. And I was like, my jaw dropped. I was like, thank God. And I'm like, you're not going to sue anybody? She said, no, but he does find it quite curious that it says used by permission. Do you know how that came about? And I said, well, no, not exactly, but I'll find out. And I called James up and I go, James, you've got used by permission, but Robert Smith had never, even heard of The Crow. He goes, oh, yeah, because, I always see stuff, I always see lyrics, and, people just write used by permission. So I thought, okay, well, I'll just, I'll write used by permission, I'll use the lyrics, and I'm sure that'd be fine. Like, because I see it all over the place. So I was like, wow, thank God he really liked the material.
Right.
But
right.
Anyway, it was an amazing journey putting the album together. The first song written for the film, actually, by any band, I'd gotten Stone Temple Pilots' first album, Core, as a demo. Before it was a pre-release demo. It was actually, I shouldn't say, the pre-release copy, because we were working with Interscope and Atlantic sent me some stuff over, and and I heard it and I was like blown away. I'm like, these guys are amazing. They're going to be stars. And so Tom Carolyn was our exec at Atlantic, and kind of oversaw for Atlantic while we had Tom Wally at Interscope. So I got blessed with two legendary A&R executives to work with. And I called Tom. I was like, I really like this SDP Stone Temple Pilots track. And he goes, I was like, do you think they'd write something for us? And he said, absolutely. And they wrote it. The first demo I got was called Only Dying. And, I was just ecstatic to have a song. Of course, later, after Brandon passed, it was just, it was something that just unfortunately could be looked at is diminishing in some manner his memory. And so they were incredible about it and ended up, understanding. And then when they wrote Big Empty and wrote it to me as a demo, I just, and by that point they were already stars. Their first album before it came out, I was just bowled over and so thankful that they had been so respectful. And, the song became an immediate radio hit, even though we had no singles rights to it. But yeah, all of the bands were incredible to work with. I talked to the DeLeo brothers about, where we were at. We showed bands, parts of the movie. We certainly even went so far as to, ask for particular scenes to be written for, and then, gathered demos as they came in. And anyway, it was a very, very special time. There was just a tremendous wellspring of interest from the bands to participate in this manner. I don't think any that I'm aware of had ever been asked, any of these bands which were already, so iconic, to participate. The one band, actually, I will say that had pre-recorded a song, it was for another movie, was Henry Rollins' band, who had done Ghost Rider. And that song, which I loved, was not used on that soundtrack. And I was like, I don't know why they're not using it. I love it. But so that was one that pre-existed. But and the Medicine Song, which ends up getting played in the film, was a B-side up to a single in Germany only, and I'd gotten a hold of it, and I thought it was a brilliant song. And that version of the B-side appeared in the film when they performed, and then the song was completely reproduced and reworked, and they worked with the Cocteau Twins actually for the album version. But yeah, so and we did have this whole thing in which Trent Reznor unfortunately couldn't appear at the very last minute, which was kind of a big burden on my shoulders in the middle of production. We were very excited to have Trent appear with the band, and just about 48 hours before they get on a plane, Trent called me and said, I just had a huge fight with my drummer. He's left the band. I don't have any ability to come and appear on camera for you, Jeff. And I said, but Trent, we'll find you a drummer. I'm sure we can have somebody learn the song. And he goes, no, it doesn't work that way, Jeff. And I'm not a musician. And he said, I can't do it, unfortunately. So I certainly want to have the song on the soundtrack. I apologized profusely. And then I had, bands playing. I'd met with so many bands before we went to location, one of which I was introduced by Henry Rollins' manager, Richard Bishop, to the writer of the music, the composer of Thrill Kill My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, Mars. And amongst the many people who were playing me different backing tracks and songs over the telephone, because we didn't have the internet at the time, Mars played me something that I thought was great. I grabbed Alex Proyas. I said, take a listen to this over the telephone. I said, what are the lyrics? He said, I don't have them. I said, but if you like that song, we'll be there. And this was literally, at this point, I needed him on a plane immediately. We literally booked him on a plane that night. He went and picked up the rest of the band in Chicago. They got on the flight. They wrote down the lyrics on a paper napkin, arrived at 8 o'clock, actually around 10 o'clock in Wilmington, North Carolina, after going through Charlotte. And I immediately took them into the studio. I changed some lyrics because they didn't seem, I helped work with them, I should say. I didn't change myself. I worked with them to make them a little more relevant. And then we recorded the song all night long. I'm very proud to have produced it. And then literally they went on camera at 8 a.m. in the morning, having never slept, and recorded and were filmed doing all of that, what we call the big movie shootout, which you were referring to earlier, where Skank gets murdered. That entire scene, the entire day long, what troopers having no sleep, and that's how that song ended up in the movie. Anyway, I could go on quite unendingly about the various aspects of the music, but that's just to give you a few anecdotal stories.
Great, thank you very much. And I love the music. I have all of the albums, and also Graeme Revell's score was re-released in an expanded form. I also have the song album, and it was the right approach to have this kind of rock score music fusion. And I think Graeme Revell also did a beautiful job of capturing the film story with his music. I mean, it has saxophone elements, strings, piano. It beautifully captures the romantic aspect of the story, between Eric Draven, Brandon Lee's character, and the young Sarah, and also Shelley, who has been murdered. They intended to get married on Halloween, and then they were killed by T-Bird's gang. And so all of that was perfectly captured by the music, and I'm really fond of the score and the songs. Brandon Lee sadly passed away during the making of this film, and it was a big tragedy. And may I ask how many days you had left on the schedule and how you were eventually able to save the picture?
Well, yeah, we technically had well, there was two things going on. We were over budget. We were behind schedule significantly. We really at that point on that day anticipated we had at least a week, but possibly as many as 8 to 10 days. One thing we had not contemplated in building out the schedule was doing what Alex Proyas and David Fincher both did when they were doing the amazing commercial at Propaganda. They did something called clocking, in which they filmed the scene going around in a 360-degree circle and would capture, the scene in different camera positions and settings within the scene, and so it really had obviously a beautiful effect for the film, but it put us behind schedule. There's one single thing probably, and Alex wanted to make certain it was covered appropriately. So we probably, on the actual schedule, we were day 49 of 52. But I mean, we had 3 days left, but we were fairly certain we were, probably doing 60 days, 58 days at least. So there were aspects of the story that we had in the script that we had to adjust. The biggest was the use of the Skull Cowboy, which was a character that appears fleetingly in the comics and is kind of a representative of what happens if you get off your mission and you try to insert yourself back into your life. And when we were designing the script, John Shirley and I, one of the things that was very important to me was to have rules so that it was very clear that we could convey to the audience. And to me, because none of it was in the comic, and I needed to come up with a way to make it very clear. To me, someone coming back from the dead, this is the hand of God, an avenging angel, could only be put on the path to find the information needed to solve making the wrong things right. And so, if you will, the crow was the hand of God, touching, I had this idea of you could touch an environment, get a spark, and learn the information, because the idea in my mind was you come back without memories even, and you piece this world back together. But there needed to be a physical manifestation and representation of what would happen if you didn't stay on that mission and just chose, to be essentially someone who is an avenging angel who wants to just be human. And I reference the angels of Wings of Desire, of Wim Wenders' Wings of Desire. They just wanted to be human. Well, what happens if an avenging angel just wanted to be human? So the Skull Cowboy was really there to present at various junctures in the story reminders that Eric needed to continue on his path, or he would end up like him. And of course, he does choose to go off that path in saving the little girl, Sarah. And so we found, and it's one of those things you develop in a screenplay because the reader needs to understand everything that's going on, but audiences appreciate and learn things. A picture's worth 1,000 words, and understood and could read into the fact that all of a sudden Eric becomes somewhat mortal when he goes off his path, when Top Dollar takes Sarah. And by the way, her name was Ellie in the comic, but his girlfriend was Shelley, so we changed from Ellie to Sarah instead of having Ellie and Shelley, which could sound too similar to the audience and might confuse people. But it could take him off the path. So the majority of scenes actually involve the use of the Skull Cowboy, Michael Berryman, who is an incredible trooper and, kind of sat waiting to get those scenes incorporated. And we ultimately found that we could complete without that narrative thread. Beyond that, there were certainly pieces of scenes, most famously, George Lucas, who had known my partner Ed Pressman, called him and said, look, if there's anything that you need, we have a new technology that allows us to essentially repurpose actors from one scene to another. And he said, we'll happily give this technology to your VFX company, which was DreamQuest. And he did so at no cost. It was very wonderful and gallant offer he made. And that software had never been used at that point in any film. And so, we used it, not a lot of seconds involved, taking a scene, which I'll never forget. We were all freezing. It was sub-freezing temperature. One of the first, it may have been the first night, the rain cans are going. Eric Brandon is shivering really, and with obviously with smoke coming out of his mouth, which was all real. I think it was in Celsius minus probably 2 or 3. It was about 25 degrees outside Fahrenheit, and he comes down that alleyway, and we had different takes of it. And one we repurposed for him to actually walk into the apartment to sit down at the makeup table when he returns, and he decides he sees the masks of comedy and tragedy, and he emulates that look in trying to disguise himself. And so that was a critical moment. We used some others. We used Brandon's stunt doubles and stunt men, Chad Stahelski, and who's a big director of many films, and Jeff Cadiente. So I mean, when Sarah runs into the loft and he's by the window in shadow, I believe that's Chad. And then there were a couple of others where we used Jeff, but we were able to finish the film. The biggest amount of scenes there were additional scenes aside from what was done in North Carolina on an island off Seattle, which are some of the reflective, beautiful bits of flowers and so forth. And it was very important. I mean, the first cut of the film was very difficult to watch. I think Alex had turned, it was very hard for him. I think that, all of this material had been shot. And it was very important to me that every last frame of the romance, of that love, Enduring Love would be incorporated, which then we all went into the movie. But a lot of that stuff, when it was being filmed, we weren't quite sure how it would make it in, but it all became pertinent. These were the kinds of things, the vignettes, the flashbacks, where they could be done without Brennan, that we utilized to fill out the movie. I mean, ultimately, again, it's not like there were tremendous numbers of scenes missing. It was, something we were able to do and complete. And thankfully, it turned out that the Skull Cowboy wasn't needed, and those scenes possibly might not have made the final cut. I mean, frankly. So we thankfully were able to finish. And, at first, certainly, in a very unusual situation, I mean, it was obviously nearly impossible for everyone emotionally. We were all so broken. It was such a devastating loss. And, in a very gallant move from the insurance people, which you don't always see, they literally stepped in and said, look, if you don't want to complete this film, that's fine. We will shelve it. We will, in fact, pay everything that needs to be paid off. We understand that it would be probably impossible. Particularly, this was, for Alex, I think, an incredibly difficult moment. And then Linda Lee and Eliza Hutton, Linda Lee, Brendan's mother, Eliza Hutton, knew how important it was to Brandon. They asked Alex if he would continue. They had heard not only Eliza Hutton being on set, but Linda Lee had heard from her son how thrilled he was doing this role, and how much he poured himself into it. I mean, Brandon didn't play a lick of guitar. He asked me to find him a guitar teacher in Wilmington. As soon as he sat down in pre-production, he started learning the guitar every morning at 5. He'd start the gym at 5 a.m. Then he would take a guitar lesson all before he got to set for a full day of work. I mean, and he starved himself to get down to that weight, and he worked out, and he practiced all these moves. And I mean, he had one thing. He'd come to me and he said, Jeff, every movie I've ever done, did all these movies in Hong Kong, I ended up going to the hospital because I always wanted to push the envelope. And he said, I've got this great idea. I'm going to, jump up in the air without any wires. And when the Yugo comes down the street, then I'm going to land my hands on the top of the car and flip over backwards. And I said, Brandon, if we do that, it has to be done on the last day, man, because you can't go to the hospital. I'm sorry. And I don't want you going to the hospital. And he actually practiced that move with it stationary, the car stationary. He was lucky enough that the Yugo was small enough. One day, Alex Proyas said to me, what's a funny car we can use? And I was like, Yugos are funny, man. Yugos are just little funny cars. So it worked out to be really well. I mean, Brandon was looking for something. He was always looking to push the envelope. And, the thing is, he'd invested himself so heavily in the film that in every emotional and physical manner you possibly could, that we were just honored to be able to complete it, because literally, 90, I would say 90, ended up being the case. 96% of the movie was already, or 97% of the movie was already complete.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but wasn't the film's distribution at one point in jeopardy until Miramax also got involved? Is that a fact, or is it just some nonsense rumor?
No, it's 100% true. The film was greenlit by Brendan Tartikoff. It was his last movie that he greenlit at Paramount. I was very proud to have turned the decision around at Paramount. We'd been turned down at New Line, where we actually really felt that the film deserved to be. Michael DeLuca was president of New Line. He would tell me later that, it was one of two movies he regretted not making, not greenlighting, even though David Scow had made multiple films there and had been a top rewriter of voice for Mike DeLuca. But my friend Inga Weinstein at Paramount, who would later go on to discover and then manage Jewel while she was still living in her van. Her boyfriend was a drummer, and Inga's was. But we've been friends for a long time. She was senior vice president of Paramount Production, working under Brandon Tartikoff. Turned Brandon around And we were just blessed with an amazing group of executives there, Don Granger, John Goldwyn, and a couple of others. And we were, when we had the change of leadership at Paramount, and Sherry Lansing stepped in, we kind of knew it wasn't her type of film per se, but she was incredibly supportive nonetheless. And once we were prepared to deliver, and she was supportive throughout the process, which I was so appreciative of. The day we delivered the movie, it was literally the headline in Variety that Viacom is going to Viacom to buy in hunt for Paramount. 1 week earlier, it said AT&T to buy Paramount, and all of a sudden the company was in play, the studio was in play, and we showed the movie to Sherry Lansing and Barry London, head of marketing, and they said, "Look, we have a negative pickup agreement. However, the studio is for sale, and at this moment, we have two companies. We don't know, AT&T or Viacom are going to buy us, or maybe there's will be a third that comes out of the woodwork tomorrow." And because this is a pickup for North America, there's a little clause in the agreement that states the film must be a grade A level entertainment, work of entertainment. And Barry London said, "Look, we don't want to exercise this, but unfortunately we can't, really take this film on with the studio in play." And so, literally every other studio in town passed. I actually got a call from one executive that I knew quite well, a studio president, who said to me he'd seen the film, it was the darkest movie he'd ever seen. It should not be released, and in fact should sit on a shelf and never be seen by anyone. This was a studio head who went on to produce a number of pictures. My heart had truly sunk. We were rescued because Ed Pressman, my partner, knew a producer's rep named Arthur Manson, who worked finding films oftentimes and had a relationship with Bob and Harvey Weinstein, and it had worked for them as a producer's rep. And we got a call from Arthur. The Weinsteins want to talk. And we knew Miramax movies, and we didn't certainly imagine this was necessarily a Miramax film at that time. They were mainly art films, primarily. And basically on the call, Harvey said, "Well, we're starting a new division. It's going to be a genre division called Dimension Films. And we would like The Crow to be the first film for Dimension." We said, okay, let's see if we can make it work. Thankfully, the insurance picked up the difference in cost because they paid a fraction of what Paramount was going to pay. There wasn't a lot of belief in the film, frankly, that it would succeed, given the circumstances. And but we were just happy and relieved to be able to have someone promote it. And of course, Harvey and Bob Weinstein at the time had one of the best marketing groups working anywhere in motion pictures for them. The team that released the film, certainly understood it, knew how, to position it. And of course, we ended up opening number one in that weekend in May. It was Friday the 13th of May, and we set a box office record for that weekend. When we opened, we would do the same. In fact, with the second Crow, we opened, and we had a record-setting weekend with the second Crow as well. And that record actually held for the 20th century. It wasn't broken until 2001. So, very proud of that accomplishment, that we were able to go from being dropped and being passed by every major studio, and having support we got. in having Bob Weinstein have this vision of starting a new company that was going to focus on genre, really beautifully made genre films. But the first film was a joint release, a Miramax Dimension joint release in North America. And of course, it was distributed by independent theatrical distributors all over the globe.
Right. Thank you. And allow me one last simple question. I know there's going to be a remake of The Crow, and I think it's scheduled to be released this June, if I'm not mistaken. Did they ever approach you about the remake if you wanted to help them produce it, or was it completely out of the question? I know that Ed Pressman was involved somehow before he passed.
Yes. Well, it's a long story. And frankly, I was, it ended up in a lawsuit that I ultimately ended up dropping. A prior incarnation of the film, the script I was given while I was still active with the lawsuit. I read it, and that is not the movie that they made for the remake. But that script so betrayed everything that I had hoped would be a Crow movie at that time that it no longer mattered to me. I could have continued with the lawsuit and insisted to be a part of it, and then tried my best to shape it, but it was not something that anyone seemed to really care about. And, I think the idea was that they wanted to do their own thing. Ed Pressman had set up the rights to do it with Relativity. And when Relativity was facing bankruptcy, he was able to forge a financial solution, get the movie out from Relativity. But it diminished his role, and therefore, contractually, it got into touchy waters with my own when others, took over ownership of the rights. So, I certainly wish them well. I don't wish them any ill will. I hope the film is successful. I've not read the script. I've seen a bit more than what's been released in the trailer. And certainly I hope that fans will give it an opportunity because I so believe in the underlying material and the story. And I greatly appreciate that the fans are very protective of Brandon and the first Crow. But I think there's a great importance in the character of the Crow and what it means. And, crows carry the souls beyond to heaven is something of a belief in cultures all over the world. And I believe that there's something great that can resonate with our lives that entails belief in angels. And in the case of the Crow being an avenging angel, I really think this is something that is important to our lives. And, the idea that there are others watching out for us. I certainly believe in guardian angels being all around us. We've developed a comic book adaptation of Razor, which was a comic that was crossed with the Crow and became a graphic novel, The Crow Razor, in which the character is actually a guardian angel. And a bit hell-bent on retribution too. But the fact is that I believe in angels, and I believe that this character is very important. So I'm supportive, and I really do hope the audiences give it a chance. I hope that it gets a winning reception at the box office and continues to occupy the presence theatrically with sequels and so forth that resonate with audiences globally.
I'm gonna watch it. Let's see how it turns out. I think it deserves to be watched, and people should give it a shot. And let's see. Maybe we will like it. Jeff, I would like to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to me today. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you did too.
I did, Michael. Thank you. Yes, very much so. You have some very probing and very wise and intelligent question. Clearly, you did all your research, which I greatly appreciate. I thank you for being a fan, most importantly, of The Crow.
Sure thing. As I mentioned before, it's one of my favorite films. I love it. I watch it at least twice a year, every year. So I've always been a major fan, and thank you very much for being a guest on my show. And thanks again. And I hope you have a great day and enjoy your lunch.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's been my honor and my pleasure. Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you. Take care. Bye.